The midterm elections, how does that impact the United States and Japan's relationships with one another? Hi everyone, welcome back to Tokyo on Fire. Today is November 27th, 2018. The midterm elections are about 4 weeks behind us, and yet we're still trying to figure out what it means between the United States and Japan, trade, how is Japan and China going to figure into this whole thing. I'm joined again today by Glen Fukushima, a great expert on the U.S. relationship and also what's going on in Washington, D.C. Glen, welcome back.
Thanks, Jim. It's great to be back.
You've been busy. You've been talking to a lot of people. People are really thirsty for your insight and what's going on and what does it mean.
Well, yeah, I think the world was looking at the November 6th midterm elections to see what kind of outcome it'll have. It's the first kind of opportunity for voters to give their judgment on 2 years of Donald Trump.
Right, and so, voter turnout was great.
It was very good.
Yeah.
And the Democrats got 38 seats in the House, so they get the majority in the House. There's 2 seats still undecided, but in any case, the Democrats get the majority. Also, Democrats got 7 governorships, so that's a big accomplishment. There are 123 women who are going to be in the House of Representatives, the largest number in American history, 40 women of color. So that's going to be a challenge, I think, for the Trump administration. The Republicans did maintain the majority in the Senate. And actually, the Democrats lost 4 seats in the Senate. The Republicans won 2 seats, so net gain of 2 on the Senate side. And there were some close races, like in Texas, that the Democrats were hoping to win, but Beto O'Rourke lost to Ted Cruz. And there were some states like Tennessee where I think Democrats thought they might have a chance with Phil Bredesen, but he lost to Marsha Blackburn. So altogether, I'd say it was reasonably good for Democrats because the overall voter turnout had 7% more voting for Democrats rather than Republicans, number one. Number two, the millennials, those between the age of 18 and 29, voted 67% for Democrats. Women, 59% for Democrats, 40% for Republicans. African Americans, 90% for Democrats. Asian Americans, 77%. Latinos, 69%. So all of the major ethnic groups, other than whites, voted in favor of Democrats. And so given the demographic trends in the United States, where the U.S. is expected sometime between 2004 and 2050 to be majority minority, that is non-white, the trends look good for Democrats.
So, Glenn, one of the things that I think people need a little bit more of an understanding of is what does it tactically mean for the Democrats to occupy the House of Representatives?
Sure. Right.
And what does it mean for the Republicans to occupy the Senate? How does that really work out? I mean, I can tell that it's giving the president a hard time because of committee seats and leadership, but could you explain that a little bit better?
Sure. Well, I think that the fact that it's going to be a divided government with Democrats having the majority in the House, Republicans on the Senate side having a majority, means it's going to be difficult to pass legislation, number one. Number two, I think because the 27 committees will all now flip to be chaired by Democrats rather than Republicans, they're going to use the subpoena power in order to do investigations, have hearings. I've been told by certain members of the House before the election that if the Democrats take the majority, they will almost certainly launch investigations into such things as Russiagate, potential conflict of interest, potential obstruction of justice, taxes. Also, just recently, there's been this report that Ivanka Trump has been using her personal email system for official business, which is the main criticism that Hillary Clinton faced during her campaign. So there's some talk that perhaps there will be an investigation of this, but there are a whole range of issues in which the Democrats have been kind of chomping at the bit to launch investigations on once they get the majority. So I think that will slow things down for the White House. They'll have to produce documents, they'll have to submit to hearings and so forth, so that will slow things down. On the Senate side, one of the things that the Senate has the jurisdiction over is confirmation of appointments. So the fact that the Republicans have 2 more seats than they had before means that it'll be easier for the president to get his nominees confirmed. And especially for cabinet positions, the cabinets, the deputy secretary, undersecretary, assistant secretary, plus ambassadors, plus the federal judiciary all require Senate confirmation. And I think for Trump, the federal judiciary is very important, not only the Supreme Court, but also the 13 circuit courts of appeal and about 96 federal district courts. He's really trying to get a lot of conservatives confirmed, and that should become easier now that the Senate majority is increased by 2 for the Republicans.
Isn't that a kind of a longer-term payout, though, with the House of Representatives? That's a shorter-term payout when they're controlling committee seats and getting policies kind of stalled.
Well, the House, every 2 years, they go through the election, 435 members. But I think both sides are looking at this as the next 2 years.
Sure.
Because next 2 years, there's going to be another presidential election. And so what happens over the next 2 years will be very important for whether Trump runs again, and if he does, whether he's going to be elected, and also who the Democrats put up. I think at the last count, there's something like 28 Democrats who have either expressed interest or people have assumed that they're going to be interested in running. So it's going to be next year a real free-for-all. Lots of people are going to be running.
And then there'll be a vetting process so that ultimately we have the best candidate who is the best potential vote getter.
That's the theory.
Okay.
So, last time around,
you don't want too many
there were 17
right?
people on the Republican side who ran, of whom 3 had no political experience: Donald Trump, Ben Carson, and Carly Fiorina. I assume this time there's going to be probably 20 people on the Democratic side who are going to run. Some probably who have no political experience. So next year will be, it's going to be very unpredictable as to who's going to be the nominee of the party 1 year or even, well, certainly 2 years, but even 1 year before the election.
So the president is going to be focused on getting reelected in the next turnaround in 2 years.
I would think so.
Right? And he's going to be, pretty much retarded in a lot of his efforts by the House of Representatives because they're going to be throwing all sorts of things at him.
But so I think one point on which people disagree is whether this is going to mean that the administration is going to be so focused on domestic issues that it won't be able to focus on foreign affairs, or the other way to look at it, and some people make the argument that precisely because the president will be faced with problems domestically, he'll try to use foreign affairs to gain points, and that foreign affairs is an area where the president usually has more jurisdiction, doesn't have to rely on the Congress that much. So not clear which is going to happen, but I think with regard to U.S.-Japan relations, your earlier question, I think that actually my own view is it's not going to end up with the U.S. focusing a lot of additional attention on Japan. I think to the extent that the president focuses attention on foreign countries, it's going to be China. So that's going to be the brunt of the focus that the administration is going to have, especially in Asia. And Japan, there'll be, the Lighthizer-Motegi talks will start next year. There'll be some negotiations on beef and pork and other agricultural products, negotiations trying to bring the tariffs down so the U.S. isn't disadvantaged vis-a-vis EU because the EU-Japan EPA, or the Australia-Japan FTA and the TPP, which all mean that because the U.S. withdrew from TPP, the U.S. doesn't get the benefits. So that's going to be one area. The interesting area is automobiles. I think automobiles is an area where it's not likely that the U.S. companies are trying to get into the Japanese market because they think the Japanese market is shrinking, a difficult market, expensive market, and they're going to leave that to the European luxury companies, car companies.
Well, they've tried it before and it didn't work out well.
I think the U.S. is more interested in trying to keep limit the Japanese autos into coming into the U.S., either directly from Japan or from Mexico or Canada. So there's going to be some discussions about that, and it kind of harkens back to the 1980s.
Produce here.
Yeah, that's part of it, and also, there were voluntary export restraints back in the 80s. So
that seemed to work pretty well. I mean, it kept the tensions down. It did redistribute some of the manufacturing capabilities, and presumably it kind of injected a kind of the higher technology car manufacturing into some of the southern states and California.
So I think that the U.S. will want probably to have a combination of limiting auto exports from Japan to the United States and also encouraging more Japanese companies to invest in the United States. We'll see if that's enough because just yesterday it was announced that GM is shutting down 5 factories in the United States and the U.S. auto industry is facing some real challenges.
That's not good news.
No, but I think that is one element that could exacerbate U.S.-Japan trade issues. But, given China, given North Korea, I don't anticipate that U.S.-Japan trade tensions are going to get up to the height that they were back in the 1980s.
What's the sense of Japan in the grand scheme of things in Washington, D.C.? I mean, the new ambassador, Bill Hagerty, his position here in Japan, he seems to be doing pretty well.
Yes, I think so. I mean, he's a businessman, and he in the past had the position of trying to get companies to invest in his state of Tennessee.
He did a great job there.
And I think that's what he's one of the areas he's focused on right now, getting Japanese companies to invest more in the United States.
Is there anything that you think the U.S. Embassy here in Japan should be focused more on than it is right now? I mean, it's hard to kind of say because it's on YouTube, but besides slaps on the back, what do you think, from your perspective, would be a kind of a good place to invest additional effort?
Well, I think the embassy is focusing on trying to get Japanese companies to invest in the United States, number one, and also trying to help in the bilateral trade discussions, and also working closely with Japan on North Korea and on China. And I guess with Russia, it's going to be interesting to see how Abe and Putin work on the peace treaty and the Northern Territories.
I wonder if the Expo being selecting Osaka as their next venue after being outside of Osaka for 60 years. The main competitor there was
Russia.
Russia,
Yeah.
And
right.
Osaka got it. That's a big deal for Osaka. I mean, it was in the newspapers all weekend.
Sure.
No, I wonder if there was a little bit of horse trading going on there.
Yeah, I think Osaka was trying very hard. Japan was trying very hard to get Osaka selected. So I think it's very very good news for Japan.
Yeah, we should have a similar focus on the Northern Territories once again. We've done that from time to time, but it looks like there has been a new shift, and the Abe-Putin kind of relationship is seeming to flower in that direction.
Well, they've met many times. I think they have good chemistry between the two of them. And, the Prime Minister has said that in his remaining 3 years in office, he's gotten certain priorities. Number one, constitutional revision, but also relations with Russia and the peace treaty and Northern Territories, and the abduction issue with North Korea, and improving relations with China. So these are his priorities. So I anticipate that's what he's going to spend a lot of his focus on.
Right. It's not within the scope of what we were originally supposed to talk about, Glenn, but if you don't mind, the 4 islands, it looks like the Prime Minister has said, okay, we'll cut a deal. We'll take 2 of them and sign the peace treaty, and let's see what happens. Doesn't it seem to be going in that direction? Yeah,
that seems to be the direction it's headed, but there are lots of details here. And there's even some question about what does it mean to get 2 islands returned, and whether it's ownership or jurisdiction, or so there are lots of unanswered questions still. But it does seem that they're going to be meeting at the G20 meeting, Buenos Aires, and then they're going to meet. I think Abe is going to Russia in January.
Right.
So I think we should see some progress.
Right. I don't want to speculate too much, but you've been here for a long time. It's an important issue for you too because it impacts a lot of things with the U.S. relationship as well. But I would like to see some sort of a solution, and it looks like the Russians aren't going to give any more. And to have the peace treaty signed and have a better relationship with the Russians, I think, is really something that the Prime Minister could achieve.
Yeah. Well, I hope you're right. I think it's been a long pending issue, so I hope it does get resolved. But there does seem to be some twists and turns here, and I mean, depending on who you talk to, the level of opposition within Russia to Putin going ahead with this deal could slow things down.
Right.
So it's not at all a done deal, but it does seem to be headed in the right direction.
And again, if the Prime Minister acquiesces on that, then what do the Koreans and the Chinese do? They say, well, we should just hold fast because we've got possession, and we just hold firm, and the Japanese will acquiesce, perhaps. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think the Northern Territories issue is rather different from the Senkaku issue that Japan has with China, or the Takeshima issue that Japan has with South Korea. But I think if Japan and Russia are able to do the peace treaty and get the island issue settled, that'll be good. But I mean, I think that the Russians will expect some financial rewards for all of this, and so it's going to be an interesting negotiation.
So as a consequence of the midterm elections, your assessment of the U.S.-Japan relationship is basically it's going to hold firm now. He's going to be focused mostly on China and the relationship with Japan, trade notwithstanding?
I think with regard to Japan, the next couple of years will be trade with Japan. Now, if the Trump administration lasts for 8 years, then in those next 4 years, I predict that there will be some significant attempts by the U.S. to make some changes on the security side of the relationship. But if it's only for another 2 years, I think that will be basically focused on trade.
Great. The Trump midterm elections implicates U.S.-Japan relations and trade. Please stay tuned.